The Hollow Woods. It started on a quiet autumn evening when the last traces of sunlight slipped behind the horizon, leaving only the flickering glow of the fireplace and the distant sound of wind rustling through dying leaves. Sarah, a young woman in her late 20s, had recently inherited her great-aunt's cabin in the remote woods of northern Michigan. She wasn't sure why her aunt, whom she had never met, had left her the property. There was no letter, no explanation, just a deed and a key. Her friends had tried to convince her to sell it, claiming it was too isolated, too much of a risk. But Sarah, feeling a strange pull toward the place, decided to visit. Perhaps to connect with her family, or simply to escape the city's noise for a while. It was nearly dusk when she arrived, and the long, winding dirt road leading to the cabin was overgrown, with thick trees on either side that seemed to close in on her. Her headlights flickered across the uneven ground, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted in unnatural shapes. As she parked and stepped out, a chill ran down her spine, not from the cool evening air, but from an unsettling sense of being watched. The cabin was old, yet solid. Its wooden walls had weathered many winters, and the front porch creaked under Sarah's weight as she approached the door. The key slid into the lock with an eerie smoothness, as if it had been waiting for her hand. Inside, everything looked untouched, dusty but not decayed. The faded wallpaper, the cobwebbed corners, the antique furniture, all seemed to be frozen in time, as though her great-aunt had simply stepped out for a while and would return any moment. But something felt wrong. That first night, Sarah explored the cabin. It was small, only a couple of rooms on the ground floor with a narrow staircase leading up to a loft. The kitchen was quaint, and the living room was dominated by a large stone fireplace. There was a bookcase filled with old leather-bound books, many of which seemed too old to touch. But it was the photographs on the walls that unsettled her the most. They weren't just family photos. Some were of places she didn't recognize, some of people who looked wrong. Their eyes seemed to follow her around the room. The longer she looked at them, the more she felt as though they were waiting for her to notice something hidden behind the images. Like there was something watching her through the eyes of these people. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in the living room, a storm began to roll in. The wind howled, and rain began to beat against the windows with an intensity that seemed unnatural. She curled up with a book, trying to ignore the oppressive feeling that seemed to grow heavier in the room with each passing minute. Around midnight, she heard a faint knock on the door. It was soft at first, so faint that she wondered if it was just the wind. But then, the knocking came again, this time louder, more insistent. Heart racing, Sarah stood, her feet cold on the wooden floor. She approached the door cautiously and peered through the small peephole. There was nothing. Only the dark, empty yard illuminated by the dim light of the porch lamp. Confused and slightly shaken, she opened the door anyway, scanning the area with her flashlight. But the only thing that met her gaze was the empty porch. The air felt cold against her skin, and for a moment she wondered if she'd imagined it all. Then, as she stepped back inside, the wind slammed the door shut behind her with such force that it rattled the entire cabin. The next morning, Sarah was too tired to make sense of what had happened. The storm had passed, and sunlight streamed through the windows. casting long shadows that seemed to flicker as if alive. She decided to explore the woods nearby, hoping to clear her mind. But as she walked along the overgrown path, she felt something or someone following her. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, though when she turned around, no one was there. It was as if the trees themselves were watching her, leaning closer as if to listen. She brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks on her. But as the day wore on, things began to feel more sinister. The second night came, and with it the whispers. At first they were faint, little more than a murmuring sound that seemed to come from behind the walls. But soon they grew louder, voices indistinct, overlapping each other like a crowd gathering in the distance. Sarah tried to ignore them, convincing herself it was the wind again, but as she lay in the dark, she could swear the voices were getting closer. It was then she heard a single clear sentence among the whispers. "She's not supposed to be here." Her heart skipped a beat. The hairs on her neck stood on end. She shot up in bed, turning on the light. The room was empty, but the oppressive feeling lingered thick as smoke in the air. She ran to the living room, where the photos on the walls seemed to have shifted slightly, as though the people in them had moved just a fraction. The next day, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She went up to the loft to search for answers, feeling that there was something important hidden in the cabin. She opened the old wooden door to the attic, and the smell of dust and mildew hit her. Cobwebs hung in every corner, and the floor creaked under her weight. In the farthest corner of the room was an old trunk. Its leather straps were frayed, and it looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, she found a collection of journals yellowed with age. The pages were filled with strange symbols and cryptic writing, as well as detailed drawings of the cabin itself. But what truly chilled her was the final entry. Sarah's blood ran cold. She didn't know what it meant, but she understood deep down that it was a warning. The door that she had closed last night, the one that had slammed shut on its own. As she set the journal down, she heard something behind her, a faint creak of wood, the shuffle of footsteps on the stairs. Her breath caught in her throat and she froze. The attic was silent again, but the sense of something looming just out of sight was almost unbearable. Story 2. In October 2023, 5 longtime friends from London, Aaron, Jake, Leah, Marcus, and Tasha, planned what was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. After years of lockdowns, breakups, and burnout from their demanding university programs, they wanted something unforgettable. Japan, with its contrast of high-tech chaos and ancient stillness, felt like the perfect escape. Aaron, a history and mythology major, was the unofficial leader of the group. She had a fascination, borderline obsession with obscure legends and forgotten gods. It was her idea to skip the typical tourist attractions after a week in Tokyo and instead rent a car to explore rural Honshu. She found a post in an old Reddit thread from 2015, long since deleted, mentioning a remote ghost town in Nagano Prefecture called Tsukimura. No coordinates, no map pins, just vague directions and a single blurry photo of an overgrown torii gate. Something about that photo pulled at her. She convinced the others to go. Real adventure, she called it. They laughed it off. None of them believed in curses or yokai. That would change. Arrival. They drove for nearly 6 hours through twisting mountain roads and fog-choked tunnels. The GPS cut out halfway there. At one point, they passed a farmer who looked up from his field, staring at them with an expression Leah later described as warning, not curiosity. Just past a rusted, collapsed sign, they found a path. Trees had devoured most of the road, but they pressed on. Eventually, they arrived at the edge of the forest and what remained of Tsukimura. Dilapidated wooden homes, roofs caved in, windows like black eyes. Not a sound, no birds, no insects, not even wind. Jake, the joker of the group, muttered, "This place feels wrong." No one replied. The shrine sat on a mossy hill at the edge of the village. Its structure was strangely intact, unnaturally so. The steps were clean. The offering box was empty, but incense had clearly burned recently. A wooden placard hung by rope at the entrance. It read, "Yuetsun Shenshe, Tsukimura Shrine, to honor the sleeping one." Below, in faded English, crudely carved, "Do not enter after sundown, do not pray with doubt." They laughed, took pictures, joked about curses, then the sun dipped behind the mountains. The first night. That night, they pitched tents nearby and drank around a fire. Talk turned to ghosts and Japanese urban legends. Teke, the slit-mouthed woman, Kuchisake Onna. Typical campfire stuff. But as midnight approached, the forest became too quiet. Even the crackling fire seemed to muffle. Then Marcus stood up suddenly. Did you hear that?" They listened. Faint footsteps and not animal. Human. Slow. Deliberate. Jake stood up with a flashlight, swept it across the trees. Nothing. But the feeling lingered, like being watched. They decided to sleep in shifts, Jake and Marcus first. But sometime around 3 a.m., Marcus screamed. They found him standing alone, barefoot, eyes wide. He said Jake had walked off into the trees following a voice that sounded like Leah calling his name. But Leah had never left the tent. They searched until sunrise. No trace, no footprints, just Jake's flashlight on the edge of the shrine steps, still warm. They tried to leave. The dirt path they came in on was gone. Not overgrown, erased. Trees had shifted as if the forest had reshaped itself. The map app was frozen, compass needles spun uselessly. They walked in what they thought was a straight line for over an hour, only to find themselves back at the shrine. That's when Tasha started whispering. At first, they thought it was just stress, but her whispers were in fluent Japanese, something she didn't speak. Aaron translated some of it. He's still hungry. It wasn't enough. Bring more. She wouldn't stop. She scratched symbols into her arms with her fingernails. Leah and Marcus tried restraining her, but during the struggle, she bit off part of her own tongue. By nightfall, she was gone too. Just her clothes remained folded neatly on the shrine steps. Blood pooled beneath them. Erin, desperate for answers, entered the shrine alone. At the back, she found a hidden trapdoor under a mat. Below was a dry storage cellar, dusty and lined with paper charms. On the back wall was a wooden panel, scorched and split. It had a list of names etched into it, both in kanji and Roman characters. Most were unreadable, but 5 names stood out. Near the bottom, scratched in shakily with something sharp. Jake, crossed out. Tasha, crossed out. Leah, Marcus, Aaron. She ran out screaming. Leah began hearing her mother's voice in the trees. She followed it. Marcus tried to stop her. He vanished instead. Aaron found Leah later that night in the shrine, kneeling before the altar, eyes rolled back, whispering prayers. When Aaron touched her, Leah crumbled, literally. Her skin turned to black ash, collapsing in place like burnt paper. Aaron tried everything, offering her blood, burning incense, even apologizing in Japanese. Nothing worked. Until the thing in the forest began showing itself. She never saw it directly, only in reflections. It had no face. It wore a priest's robe. Its mouth was vertical, running from its forehead down to its chest, stitched shut with hair. It never moved, yet was always closer when she blinked. 6 days later, Aaron stumbled onto a mountain road, barefoot, shivering, and speaking nonsense. A passing truck driver picked her up. She was hospitalized in Osaka for severe dehydration and trauma. She gave the name Tsukimura to the authorities, but no such village existed in records. Satellite images showed only unbroken forest where the group claimed to have camped. Local legends say there was once a shrine built to seal away a forgotten kami. Not one of blessings, but of devouring doubt and lost faith. When people stopped believing, the god grew restless. Aaron was the only one who had kept faith long enough to survive. She now lives in a psychiatric ward. Every night at 2:13 a.m., the exact time Jake vanished, she wakes up screaming, "Don't say its name, don't speak it out loud. It hears when you say Tsukimura Shrine." And lately, others online have claimed they found the same Reddit thread she saw. But every link is broken, every image is corrupted, except one. A blurry photo of a Torii gate in the woods, just like the one Aaron found. If you ever see it, don't save the image, don't share it, and never ever say its name aloud. You've been warned. Story 3. When Megan Carter moved into her first solo apartment, it felt like freedom. She was 26, fresh out of a rough breakup, and had just landed a decent marketing job downtown. The apartment was old, built in the 50s, but charming. Hardwood floors, vintage radiators, big windows. It sat on the 3rd floor of a narrow, quiet building near Hawthorne Street. The landlord, Mr. Broderick, was in his 70s. A strange man, thin as a rail, always in suspenders. When he handed her the keys, he said something she didn't think much of at the time. "Don't go snooping downstairs. Basement's locked for a reason." She assumed it was storage or something unsafe, whatever. Week 1. The footsteps. Megan worked long hours and came home late most nights. Around 2 a.m., her second night in, she heard footsteps beneath her. Slow, dragging. That confused her. Mr. Broderick told her no one lived on the 2nd floor. In fact, all the units below hers were marked as unoccupied during the tour. Maybe he lied. She knocked on his door the next morning, but he didn't answer. His mailbox was overflowing. smell. A strange odor began to drift into her apartment, something between mildew and iron. It came from the vents and got stronger at night. Megan bought candles and air fresheners, but it never went away. Sometimes it got worse after the footsteps. She tried recording them. One night, she placed her phone on the floor and left it recording overnight. The next morning, she played it back. At exactly 3:11 a.m., there was a loud thump, followed by a voice, raspy, dry, barely a whisper. "Why'd you leave me here?" Week 3. The eyes. Megan couldn't sleep. She started seeing things, shadows in the hallway, a flicker of movement near the closet, reflections that didn't match her actions. She thought she was just exhausted, maybe having a breakdown. Until one night she saw a pair of eyes, not in a nightmare. She was brushing her teeth when she glanced at the mirror and saw behind her the reflection of someone crouched low near the bathroom door. But when she turned around, no one was there. She moved out that night, packed a bag, and drove to her sister's house in Beaverton. The discovery. Weeks later, the police were called to the building after neighbors reported a horrible smell coming from the basement. They broke the lock. Inside, they found a cot, empty cans of food, a rusted bucket, and a chair facing an old black and white TV. Turned on, with nothing but static. And in the corner, a wall covered in scratched writing, the most common phrase, "I never left," and "she hears me." In the crawl space beneath the floorboards, they found bones. Too many for one person. The forensics team dated them back decades. Mr. Broderick was questioned and eventually arrested. According to court records, his younger brother had gone missing in 1968, but it wasn't just him. Over the years, 4 other people who lived in that building had disappeared. Quiet people, renters with no families, all logged as moved out without notice. No one had ever checked the basement. Megan's footage. The voice on Megan's phone was analyzed by audio specialists during the investigation. They confirmed the voice didn't belong to her or anyone she knew. And what chilled investigators the most was what they heard in the final seconds of the recording. A second voice, lower, male, angry. "She doesn't belong here." The building was condemned. Megan still doesn't speak publicly about it. In a brief interview she gave to a local blog years later, she said, "I don't think I was ever alone in that apartment. I think someone, or something, was waiting for me to leave. And if I hadn't, I don't think I'd be here to tell you any of this." She paused before adding, "Sometimes I still hear footsteps even when I'm alone." The last story. In the late 1990s, a group of college students from Sacramento State decided to film a short documentary on abandoned American towns. They were media students, ambitious and fearless. When they found Ash Grove, a near-forgotten farming village tucked deep in the Siskiyou forest, they thought it was perfect. Only about 20 people still lived there. No phone reception, no internet, just a collection of decaying houses, a boarded-up church, and a strange stone circle in the forest. They never finished the documentary, The Vanishing. The crew, 5 students in total, vanished in October 1998. Only one returned, Eli Martin, the sound technician. He was found wandering barefoot on a logging road 20 miles from Ash Grove, sunburned, dehydrated, and mumbling incoherently. His fingernails were torn. His eyes were swollen shut. He kept repeating, "They wear the faces of the ones you love, but they're not them anymore." He was institutionalized. The others were never found. Recovered footage, 1998. A year later, a ranger stumbled across a half-buried backpack in the woods near Ash Grove. Inside were cassettes, some film reels, and a half-burned notebook belonging to the group's director, Melissa Chan. The footage was never made public, but police reports described the contents. At first, typical documentary footage, interviews with the townspeople who were described as polite but stiff, shots of the church and strange local customs. At night, the group filmed a ceremony in the forest, villagers in white robes standing around the stone circle, silent, motionless. Their faces were covered in masks made from what looked like bark or leather. One tape shows Melissa whispering, "They invited us, said it was just a harvest blessing, but something's off. None of them blink." The final tape ends abruptly as someone screams, not out of fear, but ecstasy. The last thing recorded is a low, rhythmic chant. "From ash to form, from blood to root, return, return." The truth behind Ash Grove. In 2004, an investigative reporter named Trish Connors returned to Ash Grove. By then, it was officially labeled a ghost town. She never found any living residents. But in the church basement, she discovered something terrifying. An underground room filled with old books, animal bones, and hand-drawn symbols. The floor was covered in salt, forming a perfect spiral. On the wall was a sentence carved deep into the brick. "They found the tree." The tree kept appearing in old documents Trish dug up later. Local lore about a black tree in the forest that supposedly grew on the site of a mass grave from the 1800s. Locals once believed it was cursed. But the Covenant of Ash, a secretive cult from the 1870s, worshipped it. Their goal? To shed the human form and live as eternal spirits of the grove by performing a ritual every 25 years involving outsiders. And then, it got worse. In 2020, hikers found a freshly marked stone circle in the forest near the ruins of Ash Grove. In the center was a carved bowl, still wet with blood. No signs of wildlife nearby. No footsteps, no footprints. Just one thing written in the dirt. "The grove still remembers." Final note. Eli Martin died in 2019 in a psychiatric hospital after 21 years of silence. In his final months, he began drawing obsessively. Trees with no leaves, faces with no eyes, and groups of people standing in perfect circles. The last drawing before his death was simple, a single line of text under a large tree. "I never left."